person, I don't think needs an introduction, but I'll do it anyway. John, come on.
Found my Magento cape in the office yesterday. Like that? Yeah. I've got my Clavio bottle. So, I know. That was supposed to be the joke. All right. Thanks, Rob. I'm John, as Rob said. Good morning. Hope you all had your coffee and ready. I work at UE as the head of Magento in the UK, previously Fisheye, until we joined forces this time last year. I've been doing Magento for far too long, hence why I've got all these sorts of capes and weird bits of swag. I try and do a lot in the community. I've been working a lot with Mage OS of late. And people often, well, what am I trying to say? People associate me with Orange and Magento, but I do actually have some other interests, mostly geeky stuff. But while that's on screen, I just want to say it's a privilege to be standing up here speaking at Mage Times today. I've been to these events, almost all of them. The reason I got into the Magento community, the reason I started speaking. So yeah, it's great to be here. But with that in mind, let's go. So this is a technical talk. There'll be a bit of commercial twist to it. I'm not going to go into the absolute basics of core web vitals and performance, but my main aim is to try and get as many of you invested in performance as possible, if you're not already. So why this talk? One word really, Luma. And unfortunately, I'm not talking about the lovely, cute things from Super Mario. I'm talking about the default Magento front end, which is basically terrible from a performance point of view, and also from a development experience point of view. But even if you pick something else, something more modern and fast, like Hoover or headless, you can still end up with a really slow site if you're not careful. So I'd like to try and provide a little bit of guidance. And being one of my talks, if you've seen one before, there's going to be more memes. So either enjoy or apologies. First off, though, before we go any further, I'd like to see just a quick show of hands. Who is happy with the performance of the sites they're building? Yeah, all right, you Willem. All right. Interesting, so probably less than half, so hopefully that means this is worthwhile. Otherwise, if everyone put their hand up, I might have just gone straight to the pub. Okay, so there's two parts of the talk. First, we'll go through core web vitals and measuring and a few things, and then we'll go into more technical deep dive of issues and how to fix things. First, core web vitals, what are they? We're going to look at page speed insights quite a bit today, and I've highlighted up there at the top that this is about real user data. That's the key thing of core web vitals, and not just some arbitrary score, though what real users are experiencing on your site. And we've got 3 metrics. I'll go into them in a little bit more detail in a second. But the key thing, again, I've highlighted on this slide is, regardless of the actual metrics, there's 3 things that are being tested. How long the page takes to load, the interactivity of the page, and finally, the visual stability of how things move around. That brings me on to the first point of people associate core web vitals with speed. And yes, speed is important, but it's about performance, and performance is more than just speed. Core web vitals are about good user experience. So the way I like to try and explain core web vitals is by the emotions that the user would feel if your site failed them, for example. So the first one, largest contentful paint, which is the measure of how long the largest element on the page takes to load. It's usually an image, can be text, but if your user's there waiting for the page load, they're obviously going to be very bored. Secondly, first input delay, or FID. If you're clicking, tapping on your device and nothing's happening, so this is a measure of from when the user first interacts with a page until the browser can actually do something about it. So if you, like I say, if you're clicking and tapping away, you're going to be pretty frustrated. And then the third one, cumulative layout shift, or CLS. Things moving around the page at various points. It's just a score of basically the calculation of how many elements move and by how much. And if that's happening on the page, it's going to be quite disorientated for the user and could confuse them. And then if you can manage to build a site that kind of fails all 3 of these, you're probably going to have quite an angry user. Okay, so that's what core web vitals are, but why do they matter? With most things to do with the web and e-commerce, unfortunately, it's because Google says so. Pass in your core web vitals on each of your pages on your website will give you a rankings boost. Rankings is better SEO, which is more traffic, and likely more revenue. Equally, in terms of performance, having a fast site is proven to increase conversion rates. There's lots of graphics. We won't go into those today. But yeah, Google says so. And then just this graphic just highlights all the different, what Google calls search signals for this page experience in order to get your rankings boost. So it is heavily focused on Core Web Vitals, but you can see there's also a few other things. So whether your site's mobile friendly, whether it's secure, and intrusive interstitials is basically how many annoying pop-ups you have on the site. You do get marked down for those. And then from a development point of view, why should you care about Core Web Vitals? Because in my opinion, you should care about doing a good job, delivering a good product. Okay, what should we aim for? Right, so I grew up in the kind of early 90s. This is what computer games used to look like. Fantastic. Most games back then, and probably still true to nowadays as well, in order to get to the next part of the game, or maybe even complete the game, you'd have to pass 3 arbitrary tasks or challenges or trials. Core Web Vitals are no different. You need to pass all 3. You can't just pass 1 or 2, and you need to pass them on mobile and desktop. If you fail just 1, you're not going to get a rankings boost. So, back to this graphic. The reason that green box is around the Core Web Vitals, you need to pass them all. There's no point passing 1 or 2. Next, that brings us on to the scores. So we've talked about Core Web Vitals, but what about this performance score that we get in PageSpeed Insights or when we're in a Lighthouse test in our DevTools? So the score is a useful guide, and a good score generally means better performance, and generally means better Core Web Vitals, but it's not always the case. Scores are just a snapshot, just a guide. Your Web Vitals are based on real user data. That brings me on to the next section, which is lab and field data. So first off, lab data. So this is what you get when you run a Lighthouse test in PageSpeed Insights or in your DevTools. You get a score on each run, and it only measures the initial page load. But the key thing I want to point out is it's in a controlled environment. So predefined device and connection speed, and the speed is a slow 4G. I had a little look at the device. It's a Motorola Moto G Power. It's not that old, it's from 2020, but I went on an Android benchmarking site and compared it to a more recent phone, the Google Pixel 7, and you can see just how different the power of that device is. It is not a fast phone. So that's lab data. Field data, as I said at the start, is what your real users are experiencing. It's your Core Web Vitals. And it's an average of the past 28 days' data aggregated together. It also includes interactions after page load, so for things like layout shifts, and another measure called interaction to next paint, which is a measure of interactions after the page load. So it's also influenced by your users' speed and the devices that they have. And generally speaking, we're in the UK. A lot of you from Europe. If we're talking about kind of UK and Europe specifically, most users' devices and connection speeds are going to be better than that Moto Power phone and better than the slow 4G. Obviously, it depends. But yeah, that's the key. That's the difference. Let's have a little look at how each of these things are measured. Again, we'll go back to Lighthouse first. So you get this score. It's based on these 5 metrics. There were 6. 1 got removed last month, which is time to interactive. The other 4, some of them are part of the Core Web Vitals, some of them are just different metrics that measure similar things. They all fit into those 3 buckets of loading, interactivity, or stability. Scores do fluctuate when you run Lighthouse tests, even on the same page and between PageSpeed Insights and your Chrome DevTools, so be aware of that. But if you want to look at how you got to that score, you can just click this little C calculator button, and you'll get this nice page with all these lovely sliders on. You can move things around and see how you can improve your score. So on this example that I've got here, we can see that if we want to make any real improvement to this score, we need to be focusing on our total blocking time, because that's the lowest out of that kind of circular pie chart. Also, in PageSpeed Insights, or in Lighthouse even, we've got an opportunities and diagnostics section which gives us useful guide as to what's causing problems and what we might be able to do to fix them. But, as I've said again, and I'll probably keep repeating myself, we want to be focusing on Core Web Vitals. The scores are a great guide. Whilst it's good to have a good score, we all want a good score. Don't get too obsessed with trying to get 100. At some point, there's no kind of real return on investment for the merchant. So yeah, don't do that in vain. Okay, so what about measuring Core Web Vitals? So the first key thing to know is Web Vitals are measured on what is called the 75th percentile. So basically, you've got these metrics to meet, and you need to get good to pass your Core Web Vitals. 75% of those need to be in the good range in order for you to pass. Or another way of looking at it, that's 3 out of 4 people that visit your site. Also, when you're on PageSpeed Insights, you'll see at the top, when you put your URL in, the scores that you see are for the current URL the URL you've actually typed into the box. You can also click Origin, which will show you the average of your Core Web Vitals across the entirety of your site. But the key point I'm trying to make out is for e-commerce sites in particular, we're likely to have tens of thousands of pages in most cases, and this only lets you measure one at a time, which is pretty useless. So you can use Google Search Console. You can track all your URLs over time, see what's affected. It also groups them. So you can see pages with similar problems. For example, maybe you had a layout shift problem on a category page. You'll be able to see that grouped in Search Console. However, the biggest problem with Core Web Vitals and trying to react to issues on your site is it's aggregated over 28 days, as I mentioned. That's a long time to wait. So, for example, if you have a layout shift problem and you deploy a fix, you've got to wait until almost 28 days are up and actually see if it's actually had any improvement. And if it hasn't, you've then got to wait another 28 days, and that's too long. So in order to get around that, we need to talk about RUM. And fortunately, I don't mean this kind of RUM. Maybe later at the party. What I'm talking about is real user monitoring. There's lots of real user monitoring tools out there. I'm highlighting this one called RunVision just because they have a great focus on Core Web Vitals and they have a pretty decent product. Basically, this will give you far more information, find out what's going wrong, which users, devices, countries, locations, whatever, and you can group things by template, data retention, all sorts of things. But the key thing is you don't have to wait 28 days. It's almost instant. You can find out within, say, an hour that something's causing a problem, and then you can respond and try and fix the issue. And just a quick note, there is also something called the Chrome User Experience Report. If you want to kind of get your hands on with the data itself, this is all the data that's collected and builds up Core Web Vitals in the first place. They've got API, BigQuery database, you can have a play around. Right, so that's the first part. Next part of the talk, we're going to look at some actual issues and how we can fix them. There's a lot I could cover. I could probably stand up on this stage all morning or all day, but I don't think any of you want that. And I'm pretty sure Rob and Gareth would be dragging me out of the building if I tried to. So we're just going to cover a few areas, and there's a reference guide at the end, which we may not get time to go through, but there'll be a link to the slides, and you can take them away if you'd like to read more. So first off, I'd like to talk about external scripts. And by that, I mean things like analytics, tag manager, Facebook, all those other lovely pixels, live chats, cookie consents, marketing scripts. Sorry, Clavio. Clavio, I still can't remember. I'm really sorry. But yeah, basically I've grouped these scripts because most of them have no user interaction bar a couple. But the key thing is they shouldn't impact your user experience. They shouldn't impact the page load, but they really, really do. You get these kind of things when you run tests in PageSpeed Insights or in Lighthouse. Key things are that it'll delay users from interacting with the page, and it blocks rendering, and that can really hurt your large contentful paint, which is one of your Core Web Vitals. So what can we do to solve this? We can reverse the problem. So instead of scripts impacting user interaction, we don't load them until interaction from the user takes place on the site. So it's a fairly straightforward bit of code. We just have JavaScript event listeners for things like touch, clicks, mouse scroll wheels, and keyboard presses. And then we've got our tag manager code in this example. We don't run the tag manager code until one of those takes place. It's nothing overly complicated. It's actually even easier with Hoover since one of the most recent versions. So I give a shout out to Vinay at Hoover for helping me get this into the core code base. Basically, we've just added one new event which wraps the other 5 together. And it runs on every page, bar the order success, which I'll come back to in a minute. It just means you can reduce your code to something more simple like this. Might not seem like much, but when you're doing it across the entirety of your site on many different scripts, it really helps. Also, some added benefits. It helps filter things like bots out. It forces you to keep UI scripts out of things like Tag Manager. They should be in your project code and version controlled. And as I mentioned, so things like the order success page, you want to be avoiding it there just in case. It's almost impossible to not have a user interaction, even if you're just trying to close the tab. But just in case, it's bypassed on the order success page. But also, if you want to be absolutely sure, there is a great server-side analytics modules from our friends at Algentos that are here somewhere. Yeah, so that's external script loading. This is just a graphic to show the impact it had on some of the metrics for one of our merchants. So it has quite a pronounced effect on both blocking time and large contentful paint. It's definitely worth checking out. That's obviously much better. Right, next, we'll look at layout shifts and fonts. So this is an issue that we had with a merchant recently. Give a shout out to Amanda, who researched and looked into this issue and came up with the solution that she found. But basically, it boils down to web fonts. We'll have nice web fonts on our merchant sites, so to match the brand guidelines, but usually there's a fallback font, so the browser or your system local font, and the two can be quite different in terms of size and the space they take up on the page. So when one swaps out, let's go to the next slide. On this slide, we've got Times New Roman, which is our local font in red, and we've got our nice scripty blue web font. And you can just see in the before how much of a layout shift that's going to cause when one swaps to the other. And yeah, so the vertical and can be horizontal as well, not so much in this case. But yeah, it can have quite a pronounced shift. And it might not seem like much on one line of text, but if you spread that across the entire visual page as you're browsing the site, the shifts can be quite pronounced and it can cause quite a big problem. It's actually quite easy to fix. As you can see at the bottom, they've been lined up. Basically, there's some new CSS properties that you can use. This you should hopefully be able to see on that slide. Might be a bit dark. Basically, we've got some new properties like size adjust and ascent override and a couple of others, but they're all percentage-based, essentially, and you're just changing the size of the font, the local fallback font, to match the web font. So you just declare two fonts now, your actual web font, a fallback one, and then you just line them up as you would normally assign fonts. And this website allows you to select many popular fonts, and it'll automatically calculate the percentages for you. If I just sort of click before and after, you can see the amount of impact that actually has on a page. Okay, so that's supported in all major browsers, apart from Safari. Surprise, surprise. But never mind. And there's some links if you want to read more about that, or you have a go at the font matching tool. Next, I'd like to look at debugging layout shifts. So CLS can be quite tricky, can be quite hard to find the issues, but it's also quite easy one to fail. So let's just have a quick look at the different things you can do. So first off, when you run a lighthouse test in the diagnostic section, you just get a list of all the areas on the page that have been affected by a shift. You can hover over them, and it will show you where they are on the page, and you can click through to the source code. Equally, you can do the same with the performance tab, and both with the lighthouse test and the performance tab, you can run initial page load or additional interactions. But if you use the performance timeline, you get this nice, well, say nice, it's a bit overwhelming, this view of the page. And you have the experience route, and it will show you all the layout shifts that occurred and the time on the page that they actually occurred. And again, you can hover over them and see which areas have been affected. And I keep emphasizing the word affected, because what gets flagged in Lighthouse and in the performance timeline is the areas that have actually moved, not necessarily the areas that are causing the shifts. It's also useful just to use like the frames in the performance timeline to see what's shifting. So you can see this lovely website here. On the first frame here over on the right, you can see that we've not got anything yet, and we go to the next one. Things have moved down. Suddenly a green button's appeared. That green button isn't in the affected areas in the list that is flagged, but that's the thing that's probably causing the shift, and we want to look at, and we go to the next frame. Now an image has appeared, and again, we're going to be paying attention to those areas. We can help look and debug the problems. Finally, one other thing you can do, you can turn on what's called layout shift regions, and this will just visually highlight stuff on the page. I also recommend throttling your network connection when you do this. You can see that. I don't know if you can see the highlights just about. It basically visually shows you where the shifts are occurring as the page loads, which is very handy. Right, that's the two key areas we want to look at. You might have just noticed from those last set of debugging slides some horrible orange website called Core Web Vitals Challenge. I built the worst website in the world. It's a Codepen. It's not napkin.io, sorry. Maybe it could be. But yes, Codepen. It's bad. Brace yourselves. Scores 23, page speed insights. It's awful. So yeah, we won't look at that too much more. But because it's Codepen, you can fork it. If you want to have a go at trying to fix it, feel free. See if you can see how bad I've made it and what to do. Finally, let's kind of move on to a few front-end architecture and a few other little tips. So there are lots of different technologies and approaches out there. What's the difference of doing something with a monolith, so like Luma or Hoover, or headless, or PWA, or composable, or microservices, or even your hosting, whether it's cloud or self-hosted, what impact does that have on your page speed? Now, this sounds like it could be something really controversial, and I'm going to get myself in trouble with lots of people. Don't worry, it doesn't matter. What I'm saying is, it genuinely doesn't matter. Whatever you pick, although avoid Luma, because that is terrible. Whatever you pick, you can build a slow site, whether it's Hoover, headless, whatever else. If you don't do things right, you can build a slow site. My only real opinion on this is don't go headless or PWA or composable or microservices purely on the basis of you want better performance. Do it for the other things it can bring, and if you've got the budget. Finally, on the server point, your server's only really as good as your hosting provider. Pick a good one. Slow server, like time to first byte, will just exacerbate all your other metrics and really hurt your performance. Which brings me on to the key thing for me is to keep it lean. Pick a lean, optimized front end. You don't want to be on the back foot when you start building a site, having to fix performance issues. You want to be focused on building a great user experience for your merchant. And it isn't rocket science. Basically, the less code and the less assets that you have on the page, the better your performance is going to be. And that's one of the key reasons why we offer Hoover as one of our options. And this highlights why. There's hardly any requests on the page, hardly any data transferred, and the whole page is loaded within a few hundred milliseconds. Compare that to Luma, and yeah, it's just a hot mess, really, isn't it? So yeah, let's not look at that anymore. But real-world data backs this up too. This is the Core Web Vitals technology report. This allows you to see the percentage of sites that pass their Core Web Vitals, and you can filter by different technologies. So we can see here, all Magento sites inclusive, only about 20%, 1 in 5, pass their Core Web Vitals, whereas Hoover, it's more like 1 in 2, it's more like 45, 50%, which you might think is quite low. But again, that comes back to my point, and even if you start with something great like Hoover, it only takes a few external scripts or a few too many images or whatever else, or bloated code and extensions to make it bad. So keep your sites lean. Right, this is a reference guide. Definitely don't have time to go through this, but take it away. So just hopefully should be obvious stuff. Lazy load images, properly size them, use the right formats, use a CDN, use facades for videos. Scripts we've been through. Query parameters is a good one. So make sure that, these don't break your cache. Make sure they're bypassed in things like varnish, so you get cache pages. Layout shifts we've covered already to a point, but just make sure your default elements on the page are styled with CSS and not with other things. Images, make sure you've got widths and heights set. Fonts we've covered. Debugging we've kind of covered. So yeah, this is all for you to take away if you would like to read later. A bit about fonts, first input delay. This was the intention, I'm not going fast. Yeah. A few Magento things. Page builder's not great. Doesn't do great things with images or videos. There are some solutions that you can use. Otherwise, just educate your merchants or get them to use another CMS. Yeah. Luma, you could use Mage Pack. I'm not really a fan because it's more of an anti-pattern. It's adding more code to fix the problem of too much code, but it does help speed things up. There is something called Breeze. I'm going to kind of leave no comment because I've not looked at it or tried it, but it might help. Some recommended reading links in case you need some bedtime help fall asleep. Some links. Right, I've got a minute and a half left. We'll get to the takeaways. So, we all want this. We all want a site that scores 100, which is something to aim for. But remember, the scores are just a guide. You obviously want a decent score. You don't want a terrible site. But this is really, really what you need. You need to pass your Core Web Vitals, and on top of that, you just want a page with fast load times, because that generally does increase conversion. Remember, Core Web Vitals are about real user interactions. Don't get obsessed with how fast your site is on a 3-year-old phone. If you've got real user monitoring data, use it. And Core Web Vitals shouldn't be an afterthought. So developers, we all have coding standards. We all have to block deployments. If it fails coding standards, I would like you to treat performance in the same way. So yeah, treat Core Web Vitals with respect. Avoid Luma. It sucks, literally. Stop doing this to your website. Stop bloating it with external scripts. You need to protect your merchant's site's performance. And then finally, take pride in what you do, what you deliver. And it can be hard doing performance at times, so stick in there, believe. That's it. I think I'm actually on time, amazingly. Quickly. Where is he? Let's pick it up. There he is. Happy birthday.